2017, Harvey, Irma, Maria. 2018, Florence, Michael. 2020, Laura. 2021, Ida. 2022, Ian. These are US hurricanes that in the last 7 years alone have each cost more than $25 billion, damaging homes and businesses and upending lives in hundreds of communities. It's a cycle: disaster, recovery, repeat. And climate change is only making it worse. If we zoom in, the situation doesn't look good from anyone's perspective. Consider Hurricane Ian just a year and a half ago. This is Maribel Gutierrez. Her family's Fort Myers Beach home was destroyed. They lost everything. The United Property and Casualty Insurance Company went bankrupt due to higher than expected losses. And the city of Fort Myers spent more than $29 million helping the community recover. $29 million spent on rebuilding instead of summer camps, arts grants, and public safety. And the Gutierrez family, UPC, and Fort Myers are not alone in this. In general, homeowners often don't strengthen their homes to reduce damage or buy insurance. And as a result, they lack enough resources to recover quickly. The situation's not ideal for insurers either. Due to the difficulty managing disaster risks, many insurers are raising rates, limiting coverage, or getting out of high-risk regions entirely. And for governments at all levels, they end up with large, unplanned expenditures that wreak havoc on their budgets. Now, hurricane disasters are not a new phenomenon, and to be sure, a lot of great work has been done to better understand the problems and design solutions. We are at the 60th anniversary of the Disaster Research Center, after all. So what have we learned? Well, scientists can now measure, model, and forecast the evolution of hurricanes with great sophistication, including the wind and water hazards they create. We have huge databases of the buildings, infrastructure systems, and populations exposed to those hazards. Engineers can describe the damage to the built environment and have designed methods to minimize that damage. We know that different populations experience disasters differently. Social scientists now understand a great deal about the concepts of social vulnerability and resilience. We've been unraveling the complex processes by which communities respond to and recover from damage and loss. And importantly, many interventions have been developed, including methods to physically strengthen the built environment, land use policies to minimize construction in hazardous areas, and catastrophe insurance. In an important turning point in the 1980s and 90s, disaster professionals started putting a lot of these pieces together into what we call regional loss estimation models, or catastrophe models, or CAT models. These can answer questions like, what type of damage and loss do we expect in future hazard events? What type of damage will it be? Where will it occur? How likely is it? And how would different design changes reduce those losses? We truly have made great advances. And yet, despite all these efforts and others over decades, if we're honest with ourselves, the problems are getting worse faster than they're getting better. The disaster recovery disaster cycle is not subsiding. If we just look at the news headlines, we see story after story about the crisis in the property insurance market. And when events like Hurricane Ian are happening every couple years, we're not where we want to be. And continuing to do the same things we have been doing is not going to get us there. We need a new approach, another turning point. I believe we need to focus now on the overall system by which we manage regional hurricane risk, the collection of policies and programs through which we achieve resilience. Although we don't often think of it in these terms, just like healthcare, education, and criminal justice, we have a disaster risk management system in the US. It's evolved over years and now includes a patchwork of initiatives like those shown. We need to step back and look at the entire system and rethink it. The reason is this. While we know a great deal about hurricane disasters, there remains a large gap between what we know on the one hand and what's actually been implemented in the real world on the other. The gap is due in large part to inaction. Many individuals and organizations have to take specific actions to implement what we know. They often don't. So before the next hurricane occurs, we need families like the Gutierrez family to strengthen their roofs and buy insurance. We need insurers to offer affordable policies and be ready to settle claims quickly. We need governments to enforce their land use policies and building codes. We need a disaster risk management system that creates the incentives to encourage those types of actions. To be effective and sustainable, it needs to include three main features. First, it should acknowledge that there are multiple stakeholders involved and needs to focus on those various stakeholders. No one type of stakeholder can solve the problems alone. And importantly, each has its own objectives, constraints, timelines, risk attitudes, and ways of approaching their decisions. An insurer, a household, and a local government all have very important roles to play, but they all behave quite differently. An insurer will understandably want to maximize their profits. A household may not want to move, and they won't accept a buyout offer, even if the cost-benefit calculations suggest they should. And a local government will want to encourage development in addition to managing their hurricane risk. We need a system that acknowledges these realities and instead of determining what's best for the community as a whole, will design solutions that align with those natural decision-making processes. This stakeholder-focused system is also important because it allows us to evaluate policies in terms of their effect on each stakeholder individually so we can identify win-win solutions that are better for everyone. Second, we need a system that accounts for the multiple interacting intervention types we have, including land use policies, retrofit strategies, and catastrophe insurance. Each of those types of interventions has different effect on the risk, different costs, and different types of benefits. The overall disaster risk management system also needs to acknowledge the dynamics of risk. Climate change is changing the risk in ways we're still trying to understand. And even without climate change, population growth, changing building construction practices, and an ever-evolving economy mean that by the time the next hurricane affects Fort Myers, the city could look very different. We need to plan for that evolving future. The good news is that we have a great opportunity right now to build on all that previous work I talked about and connect it with an understanding of how people make decisions. That could be our next turning point. To make it more specific, I'd like to introduce the stakeholder-based tool for the analysis of regional risk, or STAR. This is a quantitative tool being developed by the Coastal Hazards, Equity, Economic Prosperity, and Resilience Center, or CHEER Hub. Funded by the National Science Foundation, CHEER is a highly interdisciplinary collaboration of about 4 researchers and students, many of whom are here, working together with community organizations and practitioners. In this figure, each of the green and blue boxes represents a mathematical model that interacts with the other models. STAR builds on and extends the loss estimation models I mentioned earlier by adding a major focus on how stakeholders make decisions. It includes all the components of the loss estimation models, the green boxes on the bottom here, representing the hazard, the exposure, the physical vulnerability, and the economy. What's new is that it connects those to models describing how the government makes decisions, how insurers make decisions, and how households of different types make decisions. It also allows us to examine all different types of interventions together in one process, and to allow that decision-making and risk to unfold over time. Altogether, the overall framework combines these models to produce an understanding of how different decision makers make decisions and the outcomes that each are likely to experience under different policies. With this new capability, we hope to design policies that are more likely to actually be implemented because, one, they allow stakeholders to behave the way they naturally want to behave, and two, they offer win-win solutions that can be better for everybody. Our vision with CHEER is that by rethinking the overall system, we can redesign it in a way that helps overcome that inaction we've seen and ultimately breaks the cycle of repeated hurricane disasters. Thank you.